What about... I don't know if we should ask this. What about the World of Darkness grand strategy game?
This is the World of Darkness. It's a role-playing game setting defined by its gothic, dark, and sometimes disturbing content. It's a fantasy setting that spans the modern era to all the way back to the Stone Age. It's got vampires, it has werewolves, it's got magic, and basically anything you can imagine from a certain fantasy franchise. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure a Paradox development studio is making a grand strategy game out of it. Now, so why do I think this? Why would a company known for its focus on games that are all about empire building, creating player-different stories, and allowing for all sorts of historical power fantasies where your nation of choice can go down the road not taken and become a nation that dominates the world, whether or not it be military or trade or culture or painting the map, for those of you that are so inclined? Well, it mainly has to do with the ownership of intellectual property. Yes, those are business worlds, and I'm sure some people just felt that shiver go up their spine. Now, I'm always very, very interested in the inner workings of game companies, specifically how decisions are made, how games are made, how are they designed, and how are they brought to you. There's an entire process that goes behind the scenes. You will never see any of this. The green lighting, the vertical slices, etc. That's the stuff that I really, really enjoy. Now, it's important to note that I used to work at Paradox Interactive, but it has been so long ago that I may have worked somewhere else. If you catch my drift, there's a lot more people working there these days, so I know nothing. Let's put it that way, okay? And anything that I knew about is already out. Okay, with that out of the way, now this does not mean that I don't like to keep up to date with like public reporting about the company, quarterly reports, dev diaries, but most importantly, there's one great way of understanding what is going on internally at the company. And it's something that a lot of people don't actually look at because it goes a little bit under the radar, and there will be a link in the description below to the actual content. It's called the Paradox Podcast. Now, most of you have probably never listened to it. And if you want to learn about the business of making video games, this podcast it's a great source. It's also a great source of information regarding what potentially could be worked on. Now, it's being head by the head of business development, Shams Georgiani, as well as Daniel, who works at marketing. And they together talk about the internal workings about the company and a whole bunch more. And there's a lot of reading between the lines in this particular show. Now, all of this, what does it have to do with the World of Darkness? Well, it all comes down to how Paradox uses intellectual property and how it manages its franchises. In Paradox Podcast, episode 9, which is called Why Is There No Star Wars Grand Strategy Game?, the subject of intellectual property is actually addressed pretty in depth, and they talk about why is there not a Star Wars game? Why is there not a Game of Thrones game? That sort of thing. There's quite a lot of stuff going on. It all boils down to one simple thing. Why would you use somebody else's intellectual property that is well established rather than use your own? Or more importantly, just buy your own. You don't need to pay any license fees to anything, and on top of that, you can just develop it in any way you like.
We've traditionally preferred not to work with licensed IP, but rather sort of develop our own.
And we mentioned this before. Our good friend, the esteemed Jordan Wiseman over at Harebrained Schemes, he says that licensing is renting revenue.
Now, in comes the World of Darkness acquisition from CCP back in 2015. Now, for those of you who don't know CCP, they're very well known for a game called EVE Online. I played myself as well, and they were trying to get a MMO off the ground for the World of Darkness somewhere between 2008 and 2014. And this didn't really go anywhere. Now, obviously, a well-established, recognizable game world with an existing fan base gagging for new dark fantasy content is something that you would want. Especially, you know, vampires. It's an interesting subject in a well-established world, especially after the travesty that is the era of Twilight, True Blood, and Vampire Diaries is something that people want, and it makes perfect sense for this acquisition. Now, here we are, 4 years after White Wolf has been bought and subsequently integrated into Paradox Interactive. The whole integration stuff is a whole different discussion. It had to do with a print of the 5th edition book. Apparently, they weren't too happy with it, and actually, the aforementioned Sham Jorjani took the helm of the studio and started the full-on integration of it into the publishing unit proper, similar to how Paradox Development Studio works or Harebrained Schemes, that sort of thing. Actually, is Harebrained Schemes part of the studio directly? I'm not entirely sure right now, but Triumph definitely is. So yeah. So then we got an announcement for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, which is a sequel to a very much beloved but oh so rushed out to market first-person RPG from back in 2004. Okay, that makes sense. And tell you what, there are probably a lot more games in production aside from the ones that I'm about to mention. We got Coteries of New York, which is a game which is more of a story-driven game where it's very much with characters that are... It's kind of like Doki Doki Literature Club, but with vampires-esque, and without all the mind rape inside of it. But it's again a whole different thing. Then there's Werewolf: The Apocalypse, Earthblood, which got announced earlier in the year. It's about where you're playing eco-terrorist that also happens to be a werewolf. Then there is the 5th edition tabletop game. Again, controversy there. Direct integration into Paradox after that. But long story short, Paradox is really trying to get as much value out of the franchise as possible, which is totally understandable because in the past they've had serious issues getting franchises off the ground. Remember Magicka? Okay. Do you know where Magicka is right now? No, it's effectively... I don't see them making a game from Magicka for quite some time. You remember Ardania? No. It's probably from before your time. Also a franchise that never really went anywhere, and that's a real shame. And I really hope that with this particular franchise, the World of Darkness, we're going to see a bit of a shift, and they're properly handling how things are going. Now, like as I mentioned, there are so many potential franchises here, but here's the real question: where is the flagship grand strategy game? Paradox Development Studio has been very much one of the driving forces behind the success of the company. Sure, City Skylines is the other one, which sold millions of copies and really brought them out into the big boys. But from a studio that is just constantly churning out game after game after game, that is good and has a long-term moneymaker. Sure, Rome is a whole different discussion. They're working on it apparently. We'll discuss that once the Levy update comes out. But yeah, they've had more than enough time to greenlight, prototype, and go into further production on a grand strategy game. Now, I think that they really want to get this right and really taking their time to do this, mainly because of the aforementioned franchise issues that they had in the past. So let's take a Crusader Kings 3 as an example. The game has apparently been in pre-production for more than 4 years. That's back in 2015. That's a long time ago. Now, however, based on what I've seen and what I've heard at Paradox Convention 2019, PDXCon, it is probably going to be announced next year with a release for 2021, and it's helmed by this man, former lead on Stellaris, Martin Onward. The timeline of the acquisition, expected development cycle, and potential release window fits way too perfectly for this not to be a thing.
Let's try this. There are many different fantasy settings, of course. You got high fantasy, you got like dark fantasy, you got little super gritty. What kind of flavors do you guys enjoy generally?
I'm more of a fan of like darker fantasy, possibly with more like fallen or ruinous elements.
Okay.
Now, all of this is, of course, total speculation. None of it may actually be right. It just feels too perfect to not be true based on what we've seen so far from the World of Darkness. So let's go and dive off the deep end and actually see what I would expect on how this game would be based on how Paradox does its game modeling, its expansion cycle, and what kind of type of universe is. What I expect of a grand strategy game based on the entire World of Darkness franchise. This is not just Vampire the Masquerade. Oh no, this is the entire franchise. I'm expecting a faction-based Crusader Kings RPG-style grand strategy game that'll launch with Vampire the Masquerade as its base, and then with potential expansions. Now, what would those expansions be? Well, first of all, we can go through the books, see what is there. There's Werewolf the Apocalypse. It's heavy metal, badass wolf guys. Then there's Kindred of the Ebony Kingdom. It's African vampires, basically, so that's a potential expansion. Mage the Ascension. Magic is cool. Everybody can do it. Some people are just a little bit better at it. So that's the thing. Wraith the Oblivion. Spooky ghosts. The recently deceased who are trying to get to heaven. Think like the movie Ghost, but with less sexy pottery scenes. I guess. I've never read the book, so. Changeling the Dreaming. It's Gaelic fairies. It's about dreaming. Surprise. I know. Hunter the Reckoning. You're Van Helsing. You're a normal dude. You hunt the supernatural. That's the gist of it. Mummy the Resurrection. I have no idea. Wikipedia is actually not really clear on how this world works within the World of Darkness. It's mummies. It has to do with the Egyptian gods. Those exist in this universe. So that's happened. Demon the Fallen. The war in heaven apparently happened in this universe. You've escaped from hell and you have to hijacked, and I have to quote this one here, a weak soul, like the comatose or the horribly depressed. And then there's Orpheus, which is apparently a follow-up to Wraith, but with more hijinks in the afterlife. So the amount of potential expansions here is pretty crazy. Like, it's an entire life cycle of expansions. That's not even including content packs, character packs, side content. It's just too good to give up because it fits so well as a franchise and a game that PDS can actually pull off. Now, it's really the perfect setting for a Crusader Kings 2 style game, or at least Crusader Kings in general. It's a fictional history that unfolds with characters that you control over a span of their unlife. If you die, you take over the next character in your clan, or you're just a character that steers themselves through the ages, trying to uphold the quote-unquote masquerade, at least what I expect from a release title. You become the king of a city, you deal with internal turmoil, and of course, advancing technology.
What would it be, character-driven? Or narrative-driven, or more warfare?
Just immediate thought, yeah. Probably something like, play a vampire clan, fight for influence, take over cities, battle other clans, things like that. Just, 5-second design off the top of my head. You could even do time progression, so like, oh no, cell phones are invented. Oh no, cell phone cameras are invented.
Yeah. And of course, the World of Darkness it's dark. So expect human blood farms. At least I would expect human blood farms. Modders, if this game has come out by the time you're watching this, get me human blood farms. Like, that's the dark stuff that I really like. Possibilities are literally endless. It's very much Stellaris. Anything can happen as long as it fits within the magic system or the rules of the world. And, like I mentioned, this doesn't even scratch potential expansion mechanics. Dealing with unlife ghosts, being a mage, and all the conflict that comes with that. And you know what? They run out of material and the game is still running. They own the IP. Develop some more. Make some more. Sure, you don't just build a rule book for a tabletop franchise out of nothing, but the potential is definitely there. And this is, looking at the options here, this is at least 6-7 years of expansion cycle right there. And then it's time for the sequel, baby, because apparently that's what's going on these days with PDS games. Now, all of this, using the new Clausewitz engine, which allows for a lot more flexibility, at least is what we've seen from Crusader Kings 3 so far. It's just too good. It makes too much sense. And all of this is conjecture at this point. It makes way too much sense. And maybe it is time for that dormant franchise, the World of Darkness, to awaken and consume the world.
I mean, it would be cool.
It would be cool.
Now, of course, all of this may just be a giant red herring for a different kind of game involving the Victorian era. Who knows? Now, this has been a very different type of video, obviously. We're trying a little bit more formatty stuff, a little bit more scripting stuff here and there. If you do like this, comments below. Like, we're always looking for feedback on the type of stuff that we're doing here. I'm looking to get more scripting done, making more cohesive stuff, talking a little bit more in depth about systems and how they're developed and how I would like to personally see it. I got an entire series about systems for Crusader Kings on the line, specifically how I would like the expansion cycle to look in 2020. Oh yes, I have dreamed up an entire expansion cycle for 2020 that will never happen, but I'm sure that you've got an opinion about it, whether or not you want to see it or not. Anyway, we're gonna go wrap this one up here. If you liked it, come on, just do it, or I'll punch you in the throat. Until next time, take good care of yourself, and look forward to the world of darkness.